The crowds gathered to cheer a simple, comforting message, an end to overseas conflict. But in the dead of night, the desert sky lit up with the deafening roar of precision airstrikes. The mandate that won the election was clear. The campaign centered on a vow to bring American troops home, end foreign entanglements, and prevent the outbreak of a Third World War. Behind closed doors, however, the administration was building a uniquely concentrated power structure. Instead of drawing on seasoned foreign policy veterans, the inner circle was stacked with loyalists whose primary qualification was a refusal to challenge the executive. While the campaign trail focused on the image of a peacemaker, the transition team began vetting a new generation of officials to staff the national security apparatus, people specifically chosen to execute the president's desires without the friction of traditional bureaucracy. Since the end of the Second World War, the American military has relied on internal friction to maintain order. Military lawyers, known as JAGs, and senior generals advised commanders on international law, ensuring that civilian lives were protected and executive impulses remained within legal bounds. That internal friction was immediately targeted by the new civilian leadership. Pete Hegseth entered the Pentagon with a mandate to restore a warrior ethos. Using the title Secretary of War, he dismissed military lawyers as bureaucratic obstacles and instructed troops to disregard rules of engagement he deemed restrictive. Hegseth summoned hundreds of top officers to a base in Virginia for a stark ultimatum. Leaders who prioritized civilian protections and international norms, like General Peter Chiarelli, were publicly singled out. In short order, over a dozen of the nation's most senior generals and admirals were fired or forced to retire. With the traditional military guardrails removed, longtime political aide Stephen Miller filled the vacuum. Acting as the administration's chief enforcer, Miller bypassed the usual chain of command to ensure that executive orders were carried out without internal debate. By removing the legal corps and purging cautious generals, the administration structurally eliminated the capacity for the military to say no, leaving the leader's impulses with zero institutional friction. Freed from the boundaries of traditional doctrine, the military's immense capability was repurposed. Strategic defense took a backseat to aggressive, highly visible displays of force designed for the television cameras. The process was laid bare during a bombing campaign against the Houthis in Yemen. The highest officials in the government coordinated the airstrikes using Signal, a commercial messaging app. When the vice president raised objections, Stephen Miller simply typed that the president had given the green light. The F-18s launched, and the debate ended. The administration then pivoted to Latin America, driven by Secretary of State Marco Rubio. He championed an aggressive regime change campaign, viewing the region as a primary stage for a new, assertive American posture. To project strength, the administration authorized lethal boat strikes against alleged drug runners in the Caribbean. Videos of these strikes were released to the media as raw shows of power, executing force for dramatic television optics while bypassing traditional legal boundaries. The pressure campaign peaked when a Delta Force operation snatched Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro from his palace. But the celebrated victory lap quickly moved past the democratic mission. In front of the cameras, the focus shifted to the oil business and the extraction of wealth from the country's infrastructure. These early operations established a playbook. Military success was now defined by short-term media impact rather than long-term strategic reality. Inside the White House, a faction of political restrainers watched these escalations with alarm. These were the officials who built their careers on an America First ideology, opposing foreign entanglements and regime change. When Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard publicly questioned the case for war with Iran, she was swiftly marginalized. Frozen out of key strategy sessions, she became a symbolic official in an administration that no longer invited her to the room. Vice President J.D.
Vance recognized the risks, privately arguing that Middle Eastern conflicts were an expensive distraction. But when the decisions were made, he publicly deferred, prioritizing his political survival within the inner circle. The removal of institutional guardrails left a vacuum, but the self-censorship of the remaining skeptics ensured nothing would fill it. Proximity to power had demanded the sacrifice of their original convictions. Succeeding in the Maduro raid emboldened the administration. They began to operate under the belief that they could act anywhere in the world without facing diplomatic or military backlash. This sense of invincibility peaked on Air Force One. Flushed with victory, the president demanded to purchase Greenland, a massive territorial grab from a NATO ally, driven by a personal desire to leave a historic mark on the map. This traces a decision cycle. A reckless impulse meets no friction, leading to a lucky tactical strike. Televised victory feeds executive hubris, making the next risk feel inevitable. As the loop accelerates, strategic risks, supply chain strain, or asymmetric retaliation become secondary to the next televised success. Unchecked military action eventually creates a systemic trap. A streak of luck masks the true danger, replacing necessary strategic caution with a total illusion of invincibility. The trap snapped shut when Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu arrived at the White House. He pitched a joint operation to strike Iran's nuclear facilities, framing it as an opportunity for the president to secure a legacy that had eluded his predecessors for nearly 50 years. Military experts provided a stark analysis of the risks, detailing the high probability of massive retaliation and the shutdown of global oil choke points. In the final hour, the enablers in the cabinet cheered for the strike, while the skeptics remained silent out of political fear. The process designed to evaluate the wisdom of war had been successfully dismantled. The order was given. Operation Epic Fury launched, plunging the nation into a regional war, the exact outcome the administration had sworn to avoid. When loyalty is prioritized over strategic truth, the institutions designed to prevent war fail. In the end, the promise of peace is discarded in the pursuit of a legacy.